Grab your pre-workout and turn up that volume. It is time for a new episode of the Powerlifter's Den with your host, Cam Smith. What's up, Powerlifter's Den family? Want to rep the podcast and look good while doing it? Check out my official merch store at plden.company.site. We've got tees, hoodies, beanies, hats, and more, and gear that'll keep you motivated in and out of the gym. Every purchase helps support me and the podcast and keeps the den growing strong. So whether you're hitting a heavy squat session or just lounging in style, we've got you covered. Head to plden.company.site and grab your merch today. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Powerlifter's Den. I'm your host, Cam Smith, and today I wanted to bring on someone who's been involved in powerlifting for a long time, since now retired, but is here to tell us about his journey from being a big boy to being a ripped boy. So, Vinny, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, Vinny Dizenzo. Yeah, I've first powerlifting at 15, and I'm 55, so I've been dabbling for 40 years.
Yeah, so I think this will be a good episode to get a lot of kind of history and insight of the growth of powerlifting over the past 40 years. But to get started, let's get a little bit about your background and kind of talk about what got you into the sport and kind of what got you up to the accomplishments you've completed.
Yeah, I always wanted to be a big guy. I was always small, undersized for sports. And, for me, I had to undertake lifting to try to put on some size and get bigger. I always wanted to be the big offensive lineman. I never cared about being the quarterback. I didn't want to be, I loved the big boys, but I was, 5'8" on a good day before I started shrinking with old age. And, I figured if I couldn't get taller, I guess I was going to get wider, and just really started to fall in love with lifting. And oddly enough, when I trained really hard at a young age, 15, 16 and in high school, a statement was made to me by one of the other athletes. I've never seen someone train so hard and make such little gains.
Oh boy.
It hurt me to the core. But back then, like the thing that is so omnipresent now is nutrition. When nutrition was, 40 years ago, people really, you drank milk, you ate whatever you had for dinner, breakfast, lunch, whatever your parents gave you. Like, it wasn't protein powders and supplements. It was just, so not knowing about that aspect and what a difference nutrition makes, I think that's been one of the hugest game changers for people, is really understanding nutrition better and how to use it with lifting.
Yeah, so we can dive into that. I think obviously you said you started off like younger as a smaller kid and then got up to over 300 pounds and now you're back down. So I guess maybe along that journey of going up and down in weight, what are some of the biggest things nutrition-wise that you kind of took from it?
Well, the one thing I always took, but when I started realizing what nutrition was, it was just, I just wanted to get bigger at all costs. And at a certain point, I always tried to get enough protein in once I realized its importance, but I just wanted to gain weight. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever seen J.M. Blakely, like, how he discusses gaining weight. And I think I'm older than J.M., but it just eat to get bigger. And that's what I did. I just kept eating and eating and eating and, just kept moving up weight classes. And I probably could have done it smarter, but I mean, at a certain point, it's, you can only put on so much muscle at a time. And I had been natural up until I was 30. So again, you could still put on a lot of muscle naturally, but you could put on even more enhanced.
Yeah. And I think one of the interesting things about powerlifting that they don't really tell you about when you first get into it is just how much of a part-time job eating is, especially if you're trying to go up in weight classes.
I absolutely love eating. So that's one of I'm Italian. I grew up, food was paramount. My wife and I have been together 33 years. We love to eat. So figuring out ways to eat to get smaller was a lot different than getting bigger, because it was just, I was eating 7,000 calories a day regularly. I ate a half-gallon ice cream almost every night. I would eat McDonald's on the way home from work before I had dinner. They'd laugh because one of the gyms, a big gym before Hellbent was here, we had Southside Gym, where a lot of great lifters came out of in Connecticut. And, I'd be packing a box of ring dings. My post-workout meal would be a box of ring dings and, I don't know, a quart of milk.
Yeah.
So when you're just trying to get bigger, I never had a problem with it. I love being full. It's my favorite thing. I'm a tortured soul, and that I used to, at my biggest, I was 328 and a half. I never got credit for 330, so I can't say it. And today I weighed 195 and a half. So I've lost over 130 pounds, but I still have the appetite. Like I could go out, eat with big boys, and I'm like, I'm putting plates away and they're done. I'm like, it's a curse.
Yeah, and I think what one of the things too that's kind of shifted in the sport, at least what I've kind of seen and just heard, is that like kind of over the years, like more in your era, a lot of the people were just eating what they could eat to get big. Now it's a lot more like clean eating. So like trying to get 7,000 calories by going to McDonald's is a lot easier than going to get your beef and rice because that's like 5 pounds of meat right there.
Yeah. And again, for people when they want to put on size, I mean, I'm not telling everybody to throw caution to the wind, but mass moves mass. And that's what I loved about powerlifting back in the day. Ryan Hout, Kazmaier, all these monsters, they weren't looking in the mirror. Like, they just wanted to move weight. Kennedy, I mean, these guys were huge. And so for me, that's what it was all about. But the one thing I always said is I always said I would take all the weight off, and no one ever believed me.
Yeah, so I guess as far as your career, I know you said you've benched 600 raw in 3 different weight classes, and then, I think what I first heard about you for and most known for is the 900 poly bench, because even today, that's something that you don't really see much. You see 7s and sometimes 8s, and there's a couple like Hoff and stuff that can do 1,000, but that's just a whole different story. But, maybe kinda talk about getting into that and maybe where you started, whether it was raw or equipped, because obviously at that time, equipped was more kinda dominant.
Yeah, well, how I had started was, everything was there was only one type of lifting, there was powerlifting,
Yeah.
which was awesome because it wasn't, the one-legged, male firefighter age 33 to 34 and a half. Like it was just you had one number to go for, which was awesome. And so I just lifted with whatever equipment was available from, these tight poly shirts to, whatever denim shirts to then, back to the poly, back to open back. The interesting thing is I was a much better squatter and deadlifter than I ever was a bencher. I couldn't bench 400 in a shirt forever. And then I ruptured 2 discs in my back. And, as I got through that, pretty much back then, again, I was 28. So we're talking, 27 years ago. There wasn't the recovery. There wasn't the same amount of information where people could make comebacks from those things. Like now I see Brian Carroll, people, do a lot, can do a lot to recover. So, when I got to the point where I could actually walk when I wasn't in pain, and went back to the gym, I was like, I loved powerlifting and bench press was all I had.
Mhm.
So I'll always give credit back to Bill Crawford, because when I started equipped benching, I reached out to Bill and he was really good to me. And I was going up to, train with him in upstate New York. And I would go, there's a guy, Glenn Shabbat, who was actually a raw bench presser. I mean, he did equipped benching, but he really he wasn't great in the shirt. So he just benched a lot without it. And so he lived up in Massachusetts. So I was driving, probably a good 6-7 hours on the weekends to train with Bill, and then 4 hours on Wednesday to train with Glenn. And everybody kind of wondered how I got good at raw and how I got good at equipped. It's because I trained with 2 of the best at the time at both of those lifts.
Yeah, and that's something that, now, like, and especially in New England, there's kind of been a boom. Just people around here, just the numbers are going insane, and it's because we're going and traveling to these different gyms and training with these people that know what they're talking about, and that's something that's why I think social media can be good. I think that's what social media should be used for, not be posting stupid shit. And that's kind of why you are seeing this increase in totals across the board, because there's people that are sharing information that are helping them get better.
Yeah, and I do think equipped lifting, because the manner of lifting, when you need so much, you have to lift with a team. And I think it's one of the things that raw lifters don't get to enjoy as much, and might not see as much of might not see the camaraderie and also the growth, because it's not necessary to travel like it is with geared lifting. You got to have a good crew, you got to have competent people, you want to be around strong people and share information. So I do love the geared lifting. I think it's awesome. I love doing both. If I had stuck with one or the other, I probably would have been better at one or the other. But I always found that training raw just helped my equipped. And I think when I benched 900 in a 16-week training cycle, I only wore the shirt. I know I wore it once, but I might have only wore it twice in 16 weeks before the meet.
Oh, wow.
And those shirts were a lot harder to master than the banded shirts that I'm seeing now. And I have nothing against the banded shirts whatsoever. I wore the single ply t-shirt of a bench shirt through open back to, people are like, oh, people beat your numbers. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I've told everybody. Funny, Rob Weber, who trains at at Hellbent, who's a really good friend of mine. He's first time he squatted 1,000. I'm like, yeah, I set a world record in the bench when there was only one record per weight class. And I went to work on Monday and like, hey, what'd you do this weekend? I'm like, I set a world record. Or they're like, oh, that's nice, good for you. And there's no parade for any of us. So to get so hung up on the evolution of equipment, I think is foolish. I also think, judging standards kind of can be all over the place, but we know what greatness is. I'm not going to question Dave Hoff.
Yeah.
Like those numbers, Ed Cohn, I couldn't tell you what Ed's lifts are. I know Ed, he's a great guy. I know Ed's the GOAT. I don't know any of Ed's numbers. I'm not that kind of historian, but I do know who good lifters are.
Yeah. And I think the reason that lifters are remembered isn't just for their numbers. Like you said, Ed Cohen's also very involved and influential in the sport outside of just being a phenomenal lifter. And that's what I love the multiply community so much, is because you get to meet these people and get to meet their personalities, and you don't see that nearly as much in Raw.
Yeah, I definitely agree with it. And I think the culture, I liken, raw lifting to geared lifting to kind of like those high powered funny cars, like, just going down the track at 200 miles an hour till they explode. I mean, that's what geared lifting is. And I was watching a million years ago on the X Game. That was the first time someone flipped a snowmobile. And I was watching with my wife. I'm like, holy shit, I can't believe this. And she goes, what do you think someone would think about holding 900 pounds over their face? I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess, and that's the extreme of, of geared powerlifting. Of course, there's a few monsters who are squatting, crazy numbers, a few monsters benching crazy numbers raw. But by and large, I mean, I've never been scared to get under raw weight on a squat. I've never been scared, but I've been under some equipped benches where I'm like, I don't know if this is such a great idea.
Yeah, and I personally like doing both as well. And like, I'm doing a raw meet next week, and then the week after that, I'll be getting back in the gear. And then, so it's something that, like, I just love powerlifting, and I like having both avenues, because for me, it's going to be a way to kind of keep longevity in terms of not burning out. And I think that's why I think everyone should give it a try, even if you're going to try single ply, or even if you want to just throw on a band shirt and do bench only. Like, I think it's a way to keep things exciting and a way to grow the sport as well and meet new people.
100%. I mean, that's the great thing, regardless of, I love that when there was one standard, because you kind of always knew where you stood. But the fact that there's so many different avenues for people to compete, seems to have brought more people to the sport, which is fun. The more people competing, the better. I mean, it's interesting. I was listening to like a Huberman podcast. I'm very into like longevity now. And, especially considering some of the contemporaries I've lifted and competed against are no longer with us. And I'm only 55. So, the longevity and the health of it all has become kind of paramount to me. And just hearing them, I think, Joe Rogan went to West Side to interview Louis. Though Joe doesn't go to interview anybody.
Yeah.
Huberman they were talking about, West Side Barbell and Mark Bell. And I think the fact that powerlifting and powerlifters have become more of the conversation and just general life has been awesome.
Yeah, so I think that's a good segue to kind of talk about your journey from your peak weight down to where you are now, some of the experiences, maybe some of the setbacks you had. So I guess the first thing I want to know is, at what point, or like when were you like, all right, it's time to get back down?
All right. So unfortunately, I had lost my brother to gastric bypass. He had complications from surgery. My brother was a big guy and he passed away. And it was shortly after I was my heaviest when I benched 605 with a slight miss at 630 because someone touched the weight as it got racked,
Ah,
which was very frustrating. But one thing I'll share with everybody in powerlifting, for every bad call you see, you get good calls over all your career, it's going to wash out usually. But I'm still pissed about that. So, but my brother shortly after that had passed away, and being the only son left in my family, um, I just had thought it's time. I knew the weight wasn't good for me. I've always been asthmatic. My asthma was horrible. People would just hear me breathing. They're like, why are you breathing so heavily? I'm like, I weigh 328 pounds. That's why I'm breathing heavily. I couldn't walk a quarter block.
oh wow.
Like, yeah, I was just the interesting thing, like when I wanted to bench 600 pounds raw, when that became my goal, I told my wife, I'm like, I doesn't matter. I'm just going to keep gaining weight till I do it. But then after that, my brother had passed and I said I wanted to take weight off. And I'm like, powerlifting is the greatest way for someone to want to lose weight because you could just keep going down weight classes.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about each pound. You're just thinking about just how do I get to the next weight class? And so I just kept working my way down weight classes over the years. And, it was learning different diets as I went, trying different things, experimenting with diets, and that's really it was powerlifting. I'm like, I didn't know that I could chase the same numbers. I ended up benching 600 in 2 more weight classes, which really wasn't a goal, but on the way down, I'm like, wow, I'm still strong. I could still do this. By taking the weight off slowly, I was able to keep a lot of my strength.
Yeah, and I think that's something that yeah, mass moves mass, but at the same time, I still believe that almost every person kind of has their own weight class that they fit best in. Like personally, for example, like when I was in wrestling or football, I was performing my best when I was around 235. When I started to get up to 240, 250, that's when I'd start losing performance. Or if I was too light, that's when I'd basically get started tossed around. So it's interesting to kind of see how different people perform in different weight classes that jump through different weight classes.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. My GPP was terrible. When I was a super heavyweight, and a lot of times at 308, I would take my opener because I ended up being a bench only guy after I hurt my back, and I would take my opener, and then I would usually pass my second because I just really wasn't conditioned enough to get a good second and a third in. So there were multiple meets where I would just pass my second and take my third. At 275, when I competed at 275, I was probably at 290 because I'm very good at cutting. I'm really good at punishing myself. It's something I'm fantastic at. So I always loved that challenge. And it's funny now because, as I've done a few competitions, for fun over the past bunch of years, I think I just walked into a competition once at like 220, when I was weighing like 210 or 215, I'm not sure. And I didn't have to cut weight. And I had been so used to cutting weight, which was awesome because it takes away all your nerves.
Yeah.
During the week, you're not thinking about lifting, you're thinking about the weight cut. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting because that's not something I had dealt with nerves in a long time.
Yeah. So I guess with the difference between like cutting the weight and like losing the weight, what are some of the things that you notice versus like how you feel after dropping 5 pounds of water weight or actually losing 5 pounds?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I feel better now. Like unequivocally, every pound I've taken off, I feel better. Like I had asthma when I was a kid and I was skinny. My nickname was Skinny Vinny as a kid. I can condition forever and I no longer have asthma. I had one of the worst sleep apneas the doctor had said he had ever recognized. I think it was 100 and I think it was something like it was 2 times a minute I would stop breathing in my sleep. I
Oh
think it
my
was like
God.
160 times in an hour, something obscene like that. My apnea is gone. Again, I think every pound lost, I feel better. And cutting, I always like because I just love to eat. So for cutting, like just blowing up and just feeling full is awesome, which is, I think they're just two distinct things, cutting and cutting for a meat and losing weight.
Yeah, and then I guess a little bit more about cutting. It's kind of controversial. I mean, a lot of people say don't do it. Some people are like, do it. What is you're like? What's your overall opinion on it for like someone who's maybe a rookie or someone who's going for a world record? Like, what's your spiel?
Yeah, I think if you're going, cutting weight is never going to make you strong. Like it's not going to make you stronger. And I think too many people do it far too often now. Um, you know, I guess if it really fuels the fire for you to, go after the submaster, whatever number. And again, I'm not putting someone down. I'm just saying you're limiting your growth. The reason I started cutting is because I needed to lose weight and I needed to challenge myself. And for me, it was fun. And I was chasing records, I was chasing big lifts and competing in big time meets. So, not to thwart anyone's enthusiasm about cutting, but cutting doesn't lend itself to building more muscle, to getting stronger. I think it is you get big, you put on muscle, and then, taking some weight off and refining it to be stronger at lighter weights. Again, I think at 275, I benched 900, which was my best equipped bench. And I benched 600 raw, which is slightly off my best raw at, good 40 pounds lighter.
Yeah,
So, like you said, you find the weight that's kind of best for you. But I think too many people kind of, if you're going to be in powerlifting, you start worrying about aesthetics too much too early, and you start worrying about, I mean, that's really not what powerlifting is. I mean, if it's just a hobby, but if you want to be good at it, don't limit your growth.
yeah, and I think that's a fine balance too, because obviously you want to get as big as you can, but at the same time, like I was saying before, if you get too big or put on too much weight fat, it's just going to be sloppy and it's not going to help you.
Yeah. But it can also be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So as far as like you said you hit your 900 at the 275 weight class.
Yep.
So from there, is that when you kind of went up to the 300s and were chasing the raw bench?
Oh no, that was on the way back down.
Oh, okay.
That I was able to, and that's kind of why I encourage people to kind of get bigger first,
Hmm.
because you get bigger, no one's ever limited their muscle growth by increasing their calories. You might, and again, there's smarter ways to do it than I had done it. But if you're, nickel and dime in your calories, you're not going to put on quality mass. You're going to limit your training. You're going to limit your strength. Whereas once you put it on and then you're like, okay, maybe I can drop 10 pounds, get a little leaner, not necessarily worrying about a weight class, but worrying about, a better body composition, better GPP, like you've kind of maxed out, or you're like, I'm going to lose some weight for this meet. And then I'm going to, put some more, take a season and put some more mass back on. Because I find one thing, what a lot of people do is after a meet, they kind of limit themselves. They're like, oh, well, I never lost a pound after a meet. I would always gain weight and I would train just as hard. I would eat more. I would sleep more. Of course I'm going to take a week off or settle down a little, but I never wanted to lose my gains. So I think the easiest way to lose gains is to start limiting your calories.
Yeah, and for me, something that it was probably about a year ago, I kind of made the decision. I'm like, all right, I'm going to 275 now because realized I was limiting myself by trying to stay at 242 and doing these like mini weight cuts and just maintaining and maintaining. And then as soon as I blew past that and got up to like close to 260, my numbers started going through the roof. And I was like, all right, because I'm 6'2" and I have a large frame. So I was kind of literally just like wasting my potential.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think that's really what people should do. They should start getting, like, when they just start maxing out at a weight class and they're young enough and they want to get stronger, just move up to the next weight class. That's the progression. And then eventually you want to, when you get bigger and you put on more muscle, then you can cut some of the chub off, some of the weight off, and still maintain that strength.
Yeah. So as far as outside of competing, obviously, you've met many people over the years. You've made many experiences. I know over here I'm looking at your favorite powerlifting story about something at a gas station. If you want to tell us that.
It's kind of a standard story that I've told a bunch of times. I just every time, I don't know who's heard it, who hasn't, but Jim Wendler is one of my close friends, and Matt Rhodes, and we trained together. We've known each other a long time. We were doing seminars, regular seminars together, which I really miss. I think a lot of those seminars were awesome, and there are great places to learn, great places to live together. I think you see that with like training days when you'll go to different gyms.
Mhm.
We used to have training days. People would pay like 10 or $20 and get pizza. It was almost like kind of like a meet experience, but just training.
Yeah.
So we'd do these seminars, and we were going to Pulcinella's gym, which is Iron Sport, which is an awesome gym I think it's in the Philadelphia area. And we're there early, and we're stopping at the local gas and sip to get, dip and Monster, whatever the hell else we're getting, ring dings. And Jim jumps out of the truck. He's like, wait a second. And he runs into the gas station, and he comes out waving his arm wildly, holding something over his head. I'm like, what is he so excited about? He gets in the truck, and he's like, I think they were called Extends. Yeah, I'm like, what? He goes, yeah, I got these. He goes, they're boner pills. And I'm like, what? So he's like, let's take them. Now, meanwhile, my favorite part of the story is as I explain this to my wife later, she goes, why were you guys taking boner pills going to a powerlifting seminar? And I'm like, oh, yeah, that kind of doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But we didn't look at him. I don't know what kind of chemicals, what was in them, but it was as if I had taken every drug in the world that would have kept someone from getting a boner. We're giving the seminar. I'm sweating and freezing at the same time. And we have probably 70 people. And one thing I hate is going to a seminar where people don't deliver. You pay good money, and like, man, I was going to die on that stage. We delivered. We did a talk in the first and then a practical the second half. And I look over at Matt, and Matt's like sweating. I'm like, he writes me a note. He goes, I don't feel well. I'm like, me neither. So we get to the lunch break, and I feel like I'm dying. And I go to Jim. I'm like, dude, I think I need to go to the hospital. He goes, I'll drive. And I was so glad to know he wasn't feeling well, because he initiated this whole thing.
Yeah.
We probably took more. And again, that's like the fun stories that you get from lifting with a bunch of maniacs, a bunch of animals. The guy running into the guys from West Side at meets, sitting down, talking with them, hanging out with, I know the Hellbent crew hangs out a ton. They're a bunch of wild people. And that's really what I enjoyed about powerlifting. It was the camaraderie, the stories, the wild times, because it's a wild sport filled with wild people.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot to pull from that story, but I think one of the main things was at the end was what you're saying about powerlifting, because all the memories you make aren't on the platform. It's what you do outside of the platform you're gonna make lifelong friends. You're gonna make connections. You're gonna make stories to tell your kids someday. Like, there's so much more than just lifting weights with powerlifting.
Yeah, and so many of my best friends, again, Rob lifts. We've known each other forever. I'm going out to see Jim. I'm going out to Wendler to go out to the Arnold in a few weeks. Dave Tate, just all the guys I've met over the years. Some of my best friends have all been from powerlifting. And and great people.
Yeah,
wild, great people that you could, my friends are people like kind of like who would lay down in front of a car for my wife, and I think every powerlifter I know would do that, and I would do the same for them. Because you put your life in each other. You put a lot of yourself in other people's hands, especially with gear lifting. You have to have a lot of respect and a lot of trust in your training partners and people you lift with.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another thing I pulled out of that story was we can talk a little bit about seminars, because to me, that's something that is a very hit or miss part of powerlifting. And I think there are some people out there that are literally just scamming people. And I think there are other seminars that are really informative, and being able to kind of figure out which ones are the right ones to go to is important for young, impressionable people in the sport. Like I guess the first example I can think of a seminar that was worthwhile for me was the Kolb seminar. Someone like Jimmy, who's the best bencher ever, even like across all disciplines, and he's very knowledgeable about it too. He's not one of just those strong guys that can just do it. He can actually teach you how to do it.
Yeah, that's true. There is a big difference between people who can teach you how to do it and people who can just do it. And I've been to a number of seminars. One of the cool things about have accomplished what I have in powerlifting, like I could just pop into a seminar, usually and just be like, hey, you're in town or wherever. You mind if I come out and hang out? And the thing I do more times than not is I'm often helping out because it's just, it's my nature and I love the sport. And I've been to some where I'm like, I see, the people giving the seminar who I know, and I'm not going to call them out, but they'll be scrolling on their phone and, walking around, they create like 5 or 6 crews on each lift and they're kind of running themselves. And I'm like, this isn't, that's not a seminar. And I always prided myself on giving people everything penny they put into it. And that's pretty much why we stopped doing them, because it's a lot of effort to do it well. It's a long day. And I've been offered good money and I'm like, I just don't have it in me. I'll go help out, but I don't like running the show anymore. It's a lot of work.
Yeah, so as far as maybe your seminar or just kinda some of the lessons or things that you find important in seminar, what are some of the things that you learned throughout that?
I think a couple of things that are really important is you have to, a lot of people, when they coach, they only coach the way they lift. So, if there's someone who tuck their feet when they bench, that's all they're going to teach. If there's someone with an ultra wide grip or someone, you need somebody who's knowledgeable on the lift itself. I also, it's the intangibles that make good lifters. Having that, I've trained with a lot of the strongest people in the world. I love, this is one of the things at Elite FTS when I've done the seminars there, because those are for Make-A-Wish usually. So I'll always go out, or the ones I've done were for that. And the first thing I tell everybody is nothing any of you do here is going to impress me. I've seen 700-pound raw benches. I've seen 1,000-pound raw squats. I've seen, 900-pound plus deadlifts. So please don't try to impress me. Your 315-pound bench, which is great for you, but learn technique. And if you're at a seminar and all they're trying to do is load the bar on you, and if that's all you went there for, you're not learning anything. My goal at a seminar is for you to be a better bencher 2, 3, 4, 5 months down the road. I can figure out a parlor trick. I can turn your hand one way or adjust your knee or what have you and get you to squat or bench or deadlift 5 more pounds that day, and you'll be giddy. Unless you're a very high level lifter. But, most people go into seminars, they're a bit more novice, and it's easy to tweak something for them.
Mhm.
So you really want to make sure what you're getting out of it is cues, you're getting out of it learning experience that you're going to take with you. It's not a meet, it's not a training day, it's a seminar.
Yeah. So, I guess my next question would be, obviously you're involved in powerlifting through competing, have many friends, did the seminars, but outside of that, what has kind of been your other involvement in the sport throughout the years?
One of the things I love participating. I've been working with the Special Olympics powerlifting for over 20 years now, and most states, I would imagine, have a Special Olympics powerlifting event. I implore people to go out to that event. You will never see the pure joy of lifting more than you'll see at a Special Olympics powerlifting event. I give a shout out to Gleason Performance in Connecticut, because it used to be always, I would have Drew and Karsten, who are both at Hellbent now. They would come down. But finding people was a struggle. And now Gleason hosts it, which is awesome. They have people to load and spot. But it takes a lot of people to do these events. But to watch the pure joy, and you remember why you lift. You're like, yeah, I might not have gotten a PR that meet. I might not have, but man, you just watching everybody have a blast, and you're like, wow, this is what powerlifting is really about. So I'm very involved with Special Olympics. I was a special education teacher for 25 years. So I really do think to give back to the sport, also to spot and load at meets, to judge, that it's hard to get people to do these things.
Yeah, and it sucks that it's hard to get people to do these things because it's such a easy. I mean, spotting and loading is tired as fuck, but it's easy to do. Like it's you show up for your team, you show up for your gym, you show up for the meet director. It's something that is very much appreciated, and it doesn't take much out of your day.
Yeah. So I think both of us agree with that. I think anybody listening to this, just, get out and help. You know, you don't have to sit in a judge's chair all day, or you don't have to spot load all day. And, you know, just as long as you're offering and getting out there, it's a huge, listen, if you can't, even if you're not good at spotting and loading, you can accept tickets, you know, at the front, or collect money, or stamp hands, or whatever.
Yeah, and even more to that too, if you're newer in the sport and you're getting involved in judging and spotting and loading, or even just being at meets, you pick up on a lot of things. You learn a lot of things. You learn how people judge, how standards are, how to efficiently spot and load, how to see how you're being safe when you're loading up 1,000 pounds on a squat. There's so many things you can learn outside of just, hey, how do I add 10 pounds to my squat?
Yeah, that's one way I've learned so much in powerlifting, is spotting and loading. Because when I started lifting, you know, I wasn't strong. I was young, and then it was kind of a different world. And again, it's more kind of like old school. They didn't suffer fools. Like, you really kind of got, if you weren't paying attention, you really kind of got ripped on. But spotting and loading, you're going to learn so much, you know, in the gym. Like, I always kind of laugh when I see guys kind of wander off when you should be spotting and loading. If you're not useful with your crew, what's the sense of being there? And you can learn a lot by spotting and loading and just keeping your mouth shut. You could pick up a ton.
Yeah, and even being at the meet too, like that's how you make friends. That's where you make connections. Or if maybe you've been struggling in a bench shirt and run into you at a meet, like there you go. There's a lesson to be learned there. It's more than, like I said, more than just lifting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I still like to catch up at some meets, and you know, I'm into a whole bunch of different things with my training now. But I'll never, powerlifting will always be in my blood, and I'll always be around it in one way, shape, form, or another.
Yeah, and I guess now you're kind of in the more the fitness and power, like obviously you're still involved in powerlifting, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, totally.
You still have a very goal driven personality, so maybe tell us about some of your goals now.
Absolutely. Well, one thing, two, I have annual goals for myself, and as I'm getting older, one of my goals is keeping on the right side of the grass. So, a goal I have set for myself is always being 1 pound lighter the following year. So, you know, I weighed 198 and a half on January 1st. So my goal is to be at least 197 and a half, which I'm well on my way to, because I really would like to compete in my 7th weight class. And I'd like to compete at 181. I'm pretty within striking distance. I don't like to cut much more than 10 pounds now, because 10 pounds is an easy cut.
Hmm.
When you're used to doing a cut, 10 pounds is easy. I used to be able to do 20, and I don't care to push myself that much anymore. So, you know, I'm on the once I get closer to the 190s, in the low 190s, I think I'm going to throw on a band shirt, start doing some training at Hellbent with all the guys, and great women lifters there. And but I always have standing goals to run a sub 8-minute mile to, well, I use a trap bar now, so 2.5 times but my body weight trap bar, and double body weight my bench, and those keep me with my strength standards. I don't know how long I'll be able to keep doing them, but it's something to really shoot for. And this way I can have breaks and hit conditioning goals. Or, you know, I've done some competitions for charity, CrossFit type competitions. I've recently saw, it's a high rocks competition, which is like, I think it's I forgot, it's a run, and then you know, you'll like drag a sled, then a run, then you farmer's carry, then a run. And so I really like to participate in that, because I do like having conditioning challenges, and it keeps me uh, sharp,
Yeah.
wanting to push myself.
Yeah, and I think goal setting is something important at any age, whether you're 15 or 55. It's something that I'm a big fan of too, because I'm a very goal driven person. So setting goals kind of keeps that fire into you, keeps you given something to work for. And side note, I think it'd be interesting to see just how many people in the history of powerlifting have competed in 7 different weight classes.
Yeah, as an adult, I'd be curious to know how many have competed in 7 different weight classes. I'm grateful that I'm able to do it, and yeah, it's been a wild journey. It's been a real wild journey.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine just the experience over 40 years of just how much you've seen the sport grown. I guess in terms of maybe the culture of powerlifting, what are some of the things that you've seen over the years that have made it better, and some of the things that have made it worse?
I definitely think CrossFit has made it bigger, which is interesting. I also, what I hate about it is, when I was my biggest, I'd be at a grocery line or somewhere and the clerk would be like, how much you bench? Now people want to know what you deadlift.
Yeah.
Who cares what someone did? Everybody cared about what you bench. Now they care about what you deadlift. That's ruined the sport for me. No, I'm just kidding. It's I don't know. I see such a resurgence like of people getting in these powerlifting gyms. I think it's growing. I think the geared lifting is still awesome. I wish there could be just two standards. I wish they could come up with just whatever raw is, whether it's raw with wraps, whether it's raw with no belt, like just come up with one raw standard and one equipped standard, because I've competed in strongman, which I thought was awesome because when I competed in strongman, there was 2 weight classes
Yeah.
and there was no age group. Like it was just, and I'm like, that's competing. When I went and did strongman, like it was I had a goal to win a strongman contest. And when I did my first contest, I was like, I think I don't know. I finished middle of the pack and I was like, wow, there's a lot of people. It's not like powerlifting where when I powerlifted, a million years ago, 40 years ago, my first contest, I was competing in a weight class with 20 other people in my weight class.
Yeah.
Like it was, I was a teenager. I think I probably finished dead last. But now the fact like to go sit at a meet and there's 500, trophies on a trophy table, I just, it's exhausting. Like, just see where you stack up. And I think that's one of the things, like if you're, that's what's really, it's watered down the sport as far as I'm concerned. And that, when you have guys who are like, well, I squatted, 900 raw with wraps. Well, I squatted 900 with sleeves. That took me 45 minutes to get on. It's like,
Yeah.
it's exhausting. And I think a lot of it's just become social media now and just people to feel good about themselves. But it's really hard to see where you are in a pack. And that's the thing I don't like about the sport now.
Yeah, one of my like hot takes is like, yeah, I love people competing. I think everyone should get into the sport, but at the same time, it's not a sport where you should get a participation trophy. Like you go to a local meet, you're probably one of maybe 2 people in your age division, class, all that like markers that where you're gonna get the first place, but it means nothing. That's why like if you're at a local meet, I think the only thing that matters should be best lifter, and even that in a local meet, it doesn't really mean much because you're not stacking up against like high level competitors. And I think that's why the big meets like Holy Wars, the WPO, like the Ghost Clash, all those things where it is the top dogs, it actually means something to place second or third versus. But I think obviously local meets are very important. But I just think it needs to be more competitive in some aspects.
Yeah, that's because there's no, it just becomes about chasing numbers at meets. It's not gamesmanship anymore. Like you'd be wanting to know what someone was doing on their next attempts. You'd be looking at the board. You'd be talking to people. And I think that is what made it a sport. Whereas now it's kind of it can be about trophies and about, just chasing numbers for yourself. And that's what I don't love about the sport. But, I don't want to just sound like an old man crying about something. Like the good thing is people could still find a way to compete. I just think people, I don't know, they want to inflate their egos too much where you need a kick in the ego.
Yeah.
Like you need the guy to tell you that, hey man, I've never seen someone lift so much and not get any stronger and not get any bigger because, it made an impact. 40 years later, I still remember that. And it's one of the things that drives me, to continue to get better.
Yeah, I think the interesting part about it is kind of the balance between like, yeah, we want people in the sport, we want people to compete, we want the sport to grow, but we also want it to, like you said, not be watered down. We want competition. We want to see people like if that was the case, then there'd be 500 people on an NFL team. Like there has to be some sort of elite standards, and the team aspect of it's pretty cool too. Like I think that's with like the IPF. I think it's an interesting concept. I think a lot of the reason people have problems with it is the culture behind it and kind of the egos that come with that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I agree. People just have to want to, I don't know, see where they actually stack up.
Yeah. And then I think another thing too in the powerlifting world is the standards. across different federations. I think federations in general is a problem in its own, but I think having inconsistent standards across different federations is also another reason why competition nowadays can be all over the place. Because, like you were saying, with a 900-pound squat and wraps, like some person could do it at one meet and it's the standard, the other person could do it at another meet and it's 3 inches high. But you look on open powerlifting, they're ranked right next to each other.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think the standards in equipped powerlifting, unfortunately, is what killed the sport.
Hmm.
Where it was used to be, on the main stage at the Arnold, and now it's in a back room. And, when I hate to say it, when guys are barely breaking their knees and getting whatever squats they are, and guys who can't touch their chests with weight, and I bombed the stage at the Arnold,
Hmm.
so I'm part of the problem. Like if you got people who are doing, knee bends, or you got people who can't touch their chest with weight, it doesn't, like, you mean you got 1,000 pounds and you can't touch it? It doesn't make any sense. And I think that's where equipped powerlifting has really shot themselves in the foot. I think if they had high standards of deep squats, of full benches, of, finding a way for people like, to make their lifts cleaner, they could potentially be, I mean, powerlifting used to be on television.
Yeah.
I think it was on the Wide World of Sports. I mean, I'm fortunate. I was competed on television twice, which I think was absolutely awesome. It's like one of the coolest things ever. Having someone call me up, be like, "Oh my God, they found my number in the yellow pages." They're like, "I just watched you bench press on TV," and I was like, it was just, it was cool.
Yeah, I think that's something that with my meet that I'm hosting in March is something that I want to try to, because it's something that's so ingrained in multiply now that it's almost just been accepted, and I think I'm not a fan of that. I'm someone that likes to hold myself to a higher standard, and I think handpicking judges and kind of testing the judges and being like, "Hey, show them a squat that like should be high and see if they pass it." Be like, "No, you're not judging my meat." I think it's something that I'd like to try to change in the future, but it's something that's so like a bullheaded, ingrained thing into the sport that who knows. But I think for my question for you would be, what are some of the things or maybe ways that you think it could kind of get back to standard?
I I always look back, and it's when powerlifting really fractured. I think it's called the Professional Bull Riding Association, how they kind of took that sport for themselves. And they decided, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to make money. We can all band together and make something really big for ourselves. And I think the biggest problem with powerlifting is it's so fractured. There's so many different federations. There's so many different standards. And listen, I'm not going to put anybody down. When you go to a meet, and I'd be the first one to say, how they judging on this meet? Is it a quick press call? If it's quick press ball, I'm not going to sit there and hold it on my chest. I mean, do I have to hold it at the top? Excuse me. So as a competitor, I was always looking at those ways. I think it just needs to become like, as a collective, be like, listen, if we want to make this a bigger sport, if we want to try to grow the sport, what do we need to do as a group? But again, to get one voice for people to listen to. I think Ed Cohn's holding a big meet, which I think is awesome. That's coming up. But I think it would take a few people with big names to kind of be like, let's really try to get a standard here. Standard. But I think everybody's just greedy, trying to grab. I apologize. Nobody's getting rich from holding powerlifting meets.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's ego. I don't know to speak intelligently on, but I just really wish that there were, a way for people to regionally come up with and to have a couple of set standards in powerlifting. Where it used to be, the thing is now you could see lifts that aren't good. It used to be where we legitimately would have to call each other and be like, were you at that meet? Did you hear about that squat? And so now you can actually see it. And so, again, as a competitor, you're going to take advantage of whatever you can. You want to hold yourself to higher standards, but when you're seeing someone get away with something else and
Hmm.
they might be out totaling you, it's hard. It's a difficult one to try to hash out. I think it's just going to take a bunch of people trying to put their heads together, which
Yeah.
would be really nice.
I couldn't agree more. Well, I think we can kind of wrap things up here. So I'll ask you my final question. If you could give a new powerlifter or someone going into their first meet a word of advice, what would that be?
Patience. For me, it's helped me with a couple of things in that, um, there were times I think my best bench at one time in the shirt was 830, or it might have been 730. Sorry, 730. And I had done a few meets where, I think I was, had hit 700, 695, 710. And someone had come up to me and said at the gym, like, well, you're not getting any stronger. And I'm like, my bench is already one of the best, in the world at my weight class. It's hard to just constantly do better. I was a 585 raw bencher. It took me 3 years to go from 585 to 600.
Mm-hmm.
5 pounds a year for 3 years. I don't think a lot of people would have stayed through that.
Yeah.
To go up to 7 weight classes and then to come back down. When I wanted to lose weight, my goal was to lose a pound a month. And people are like, oh my God, I need to lose 40 pounds in 2 months. I'm like, I lost 130 pounds over 12 years, and I'm one of the few people who's kept it off.
Yeah.
So I think patience is really, once those newbie gains go, which are awesome, when you get with a good crew and you start bench and your bench goes up. Bill Crawford put on 50 pounds in my bench in one session in the shirt. It was awesome. I'd never come close to 600. I benched 600 that day.
Yeah.
So patience, I think having patience is probably the best thing you could do. Anything that, almost anything in life in general, but definitely within sports and training.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, I wanted to thank you again for taking the time to come on. It was my pleasure.
Oh, it was an absolute pleasure. I look forward to meeting you sometime in person. A lot of great people. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.